Last summer, I pulled a tomato plant out of the ground, and the roots came up in a tight, pale knot, barely reaching past the first few inches of soil. The leaves had gone yellow weeks before. I had watered on schedule, fed it the exact ratio printed on the bag, and done everything the label told me to do, and it still died. That same week, a head of organic lettuce at the grocery store cost me $4.80. $4.80 for something that should grow like a weed in dirt. If that scene sounds familiar, if you have stood in your own backyard staring at a plant you did everything right for, only to watch it quit on you anyway, I need you to hear something that nobody selling you garden supplies will ever say out loud. You did not fail. You were operating inside a system that was engineered from the soil up to make you dependent on the next bag, the next bottle, and the next trip to the store. I know that sounds dramatic. Stay with me. There is a piece of PVC pipe buried in the center of my raised bed. 4 inches of cheap white plastic sticking out of the earth, with a dollar store lid on top. My neighbors think it is an irrigation cleanout. My gardening friends stopped asking about it months ago. But that ordinary ugly pipe is doing something that a $60 bag of premium fertilizer cannot do. It is generating the richest plant food on the planet, continuously, silently, at root depth, without me ever touching it. No compost tumbler rotting in the corner of the yard. No weekend ritual of turning, measuring, and hauling. No schedule at all. This is not some breakthrough I invented. Civilizations across Mesoamerica understood this principle long before Europeans ever crossed the Atlantic. The Aztecs built entire growing systems around it. They knew that the real fertility engine was not something you pour from above. It was something alive, working beneath your feet. In the dark, on its own clock, earthworms. Billions of them, converting buried organic matter into a substance so nutrient-dense that modern science still cannot fully replicate it in a factory. Charles Darwin, whom most people connect only to evolution, spent the final 4 decades of his life obsessed with these creatures. His last book was not about finches or natural selection. It was a painstaking, fanatical study of how earthworms build soil. He proved, with a rigor that should have ended the debate permanently, that worms are the primary architects of fertile ground. Not rain, not mineral supplements, worms. So what happened? Why is that book collecting dust, while the fertilizer aisle at your garden center stretches 40 feet long? The answer is simple. After World War II, chemical plants that had spent years manufacturing explosives suddenly had no war to supply. They needed a new customer, and nitrogen-based fertilizer gave them one. Almost overnight, the entire conversation about how to grow food shifted from biology to chemistry, from living systems you cultivate to synthetic inputs you purchase. The industry didn't need you to understand soil. It needed you to buy a bag, and the fastest way to sell you that bag was to make sure you never learned what was already happening for free. 6 inches below your feet, that quiet burial of knowledge is where the real story begins. Here is the thing, nobody at the garden center will ever print on a label. Every bag of synthetic fertilizer you've ever bought is built around 3 numbers: nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. The famous NPK ratio, that is it, 3 isolated chemicals in a soluble, fast-release form. The entire modern growing industry acts like those 3 letters are the whole alphabet, but they're not. They're barely a whisper of what soil actually needs. And the way they're delivered does something to the ground that no one selling them has any incentive to explain. When you scatter that granular fertilizer or drench your beds with liquid feed, those soluble salts flood the soil in a single chemical spike. The plant gets a short, aggressive burst, pushes out some green growth. And for a week or two, everything looks alive. But underground, in the dark, wet inches, where the real economy of your garden operates, something is quietly dying. The fungal networks, those hair-thin threads that connect root systems to mineral sources meters away, start to collapse. They cannot compete with a chemical flood. They evolved to trade nutrients slowly and precisely in exchange for sugars from the plant. A drench of ammonium nitrate is not a trade, it is an eviction notice. The fungi retreat, the bacteria shift, and the whole living architecture that made soil self-sustaining for millennia begins to dissolve. You'll never see it happen because it is all below the surface. That is exactly the point. Once that network is gone, the plant cannot feed itself anymore. It becomes completely dependent on the next application. You're not growing food at that point, you're subscribing to a service. $40 in spring for granular feed, another $20 for the mid-season boost. Maybe a bag of premium garden soil that is mostly peat and filler, priced as if it contains a secret ingredient, when it is really just dead organic matter stripped of biology. Add the herbicide to kill what you didn't plant, which also kills the microbial layer you desperately needed. And by August, you've spent more on a single raised bed than a month of groceries would have cost. Meanwhile, the actual fertility engine, the one that ran every productive acre on this planet before the chemical era, is being destroyed. Earthworms, which deposit castings worth $15 to $30 a bag at retail, cannot survive in soil that has been repeatedly salted with synthetic inputs. Their exquisite chemical detection systems read a fertilized bed. The way you would read a hazard sign, they leave. And when they leave, they take the aeration, the nutrient cycling, and the deep tunneling that delivers oxygen and moisture to root zones. They take the whole infrastructure with them, so you till the compacted ground to compensate. But tilling rips apart whatever fungal thread survived, exposes soil carbon to the air where it oxidizes and vanishes, and leaves you with a bed that is biologically emptier than it was before you touched it. Every intervention leads to the next purchase. Every purchase degrades the system further. That is not a flaw in the model, that is the model. Picture a tomato plant in a lab, fed nothing but worm castings mixed into plain growing media. No synthetic boost, no engineered pellets, just the dark, crumbly output of a digestive tract older than agriculture itself. That plant germinated faster, grew stronger, and flat out embarrassed the one sitting next to it. On a full regime of commercial fertilizer, that is not folklore, that is a peer-reviewed finding. Published in Applied Soil Ecology in 2011, the researchers seemed almost puzzled by the margin of difference. Because, on paper, the nutrient numbers didn't explain it. The NPK content in a handful of castings is modest, compared to the concentrated punch of a synthetic blend. Something else was driving the result, something the chemical model has no column for on its spreadsheet. Inside every gram of worm castings lives a dense civilization of bacteria and fungi, specific microbial species that have co-evolved with plant roots over hundreds of millions of years. When those microbes make contact with a root tip, they initiate a chemical handshake. Fungi extend filaments called hyphae directly into root cells, forming a symbiotic bridge to trade sugars for phosphorus and trace minerals. Bacteria in the casting release hormones that tell the plant to push out more roots and ramp up its immune response before a threat even arrives. The plant isn't just being fed, it is being coached at the molecular level. Castings also do something no bag of fertilizer has ever managed. They contain humic acids that physically restructure the dirt. If your soil is sandy, humic acids help it hold moisture like a sponge. If your soil is dense clay, those same acids open up air channels, one substance, two opposite corrections. Applied automatically based on what the soil lacks, that is not a product, that is an adaptive system with its own diagnostic logic. This is the operating system your soil was designed to run on. It is not a product you buy, but a living network that builds itself the moment you stop poisoning it. The materials are so simple and cheap that I almost laughed when I first heard of them, having been convinced that serious gardening required serious equipment. I want to know, honestly, how many of you have looked at your soil and suspected there was something going on down there that nobody was telling you about? 3 weeks after I buried that pipe, I walked out one morning and the tomato plant nearest the opening had visibly jumped ahead of every other plant in the row. Same seed, same sun, same water. The soil around the pipe had turned almost black, loose and crumbly. I hadn't done anything, I just dropped kitchen scraps into a hole in the ground a few times and walked away. That is the lever nobody talks about because it sounds too simple to be real. You take your banana peels, your coffee grounds, the wilted lettuce from the back of the fridge, and a few strips of cardboard, and you drop them into the pipe. That is the entire technique. No layering strategy, no carbon to nitrogen ratios, no activator powder. The worms find the food on their own, moving through the open bottom to eat and travel outward through your root zones, leaving behind castings worth more per pound than anything on a garden store shelf. You become the supplier of raw material. Biology does every other job. I used to think I needed to do it perfectly, that there was a schedule or a precise rotation. There is not. When I went on vacation for 9 days and fed the pipe nothing, I came back expecting it to have stalled. Instead, the worms had simply spread out, worked through what remained, and the surrounding soil was even richer. The system didn't need me hovering over it, it needed me to get out of the way. One of my neighbors skips the pipe entirely. She just digs a narrow trench in spring, buries her scraps with some dry leaves, and plants her tomatoes right alongside it. No hardware, no PVC, no lid. Her cucumbers are twice the size of mine. And she has never bought a single bag of fertilizer in her life. The people getting the most out of their soil are not the ones doing the most. They're the ones who figured out where to place one small input and then simply stepped back. A handful of scraps in the right spot does what an entire shelf of bottled nutrients cannot. Because it feeds the network that feeds the plant. You're not fertilizing, you're recruiting a workforce that already lives under your feet. Picture the next supply chain disruption, where shelves go bare and lettuce hits $9 a head. People stand in lines, their faces tight with a fear they cannot name. Now, picture yourself walking out your back door that same morning. The beds are green, you pull tomatoes still warm from the sun. Snap off kale leaves and dig up potatoes with your bare hands. Nobody sold you permission to eat today. That food exists because months ago, you buried a pipe and started feeding it scraps you used to throw in the trash. The reason most people will never reach that moment is arithmetic. A system that converts waste into the richest fertilizer for free, forever, is a catastrophic business proposition for every corporation selling you bags and bottles. That is not a conspiracy, it is just money protecting its own circulation. Quiet knowledge is unprofitable knowledge, so it stays quiet. But you're standing on the other side of that silence now. You understand that the earthworms and fungi doing the real labor have been running this exact operation since long before anything with a spine walked on land. You didn't invent a trick, you remembered something the soil never forgot. The next time someone tells you growing food is a nice little hobby, smile and let them believe it. You and I know what it actually is, the oldest form of sovereignty humans ever practiced. And it costs less than what most people spend on coffee in a week. Now I want to hear from you if you've already buried a pipe or started feeding one. What changed first, the soil, or the way you think about where your food comes from? Drop that in the comments because I genuinely want to know.